The iron collar pressed against her throat, icy and piercing. Baroness was 29 years old. With every breath she took, she could feel the weight of the collar pressing down on her trachea. She could taste the rust and old bloodstains clinging to the metal ring this piece of metal had once encircled 100 necks, as she was the 101st. Just 17 days ago she had been Queen of Cappadocia, ruling a kingdom that had remained independent for 3 centuries, commanding an army that had resisted Rome for 7 years. She had once looked directly into the eyes of Emperor Tiberius's messenger and declared that Cappadocia would rather turn to ashes than submit. Now, she knelt on the stone floor of a Roman military camp, her wrists shackled behind her back, her hair shaved to a stubble because the long hair of a captured queen was considered a weapon, something she might use to hang herself before her public display in Rome. All around her came the sounds of the camp at dawn, commands in Latin, horses being led to water, the clatter of equipment being packed for the long westward march that would lead to Rome, to the Triumph. A cell smelled of urine, stale straw, and beneath it all, another scent, a sweet, cloying odor of decay. She had learned not to think about. The cell's previous occupant hadn't survived until the transfer. They dragged the body out 3 days ago, but the smell lingered, a reminder of what happened to captives who were no longer useful. Ekat stood watch outside the iron bars. His gaze swept over her body with an assessing quality she had come to know over the past 17 days. Was the calculation a Roman soldier performed when appraising a captured woman? Not exactly desire, but something colder, an evaluation of function, a use of what she could serve for in the months before the triumph, and in what condition she needed to be when she finally walked in chains through the streets of Rome. He was beginning to understand that the triumph itself was not the punishment. The triumph was the finale. The real punishment came before the triumph, during those months of captivity and preparation, during that long journey from the empire's edge to its heart. The triumph was a single day of public humiliation. What came before it was systematic destruction, lasting until Rome was satisfied. Aemon approached the cell. He was around 40-5, wearing the armor of a senior officer, his face bearing that particular, weary cruelty Baroness had learned to recognize on Roman career soldiers. He didn't introduce himself, and he didn't need to. The way the guard snapped to attention as he approached told her everything about his rank. "You are the Cappadocian," he said. It wasn't a question. "The one who killed the messenger's nephew at the Battle of Mazakai." "I gave the order," Baroness replied. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "My archers carried it out. He died bravely, if that matters to Rome." "It doesn't." The officer examined her through the bars, his gaze as assessing as the guard. "What matters to Rome is that in 8 months, you will parade in Germanicus's triumph. What matters to Rome is that you will be displayed as proof of Rome's victory. Proof that even a queen who defied the legions can be broken. What matters to Rome is what happens to you between now and then." 8 months. The word sank into Baroness's mind with a physical weight. 8 months of captivity before being paraded through Roman executives. Roll 8 months for Rome to decide what she should become. "What will happen to me between now and then?" she asked. The officer smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "You will be prepared," he said. "Prepared for the triumph. Prepared to play your part properly. This preparation takes many forms. Some you will find educational. Some you will find less educational." He gestured to the guard, who unlocked the cell and stepped inside. The guard grabbed Baroness's arm and hauled her to her feet, his grip tight enough to bruise. "The general wishes to see you," the officer said. "He has a special plan for the Queen of Cappadocia. You should feel honored. Most captives are handled by standard procedure. You have attracted personal attention." Personal attention. The words carried a weight Baroness did not yet fully understand. A weight that made the guard's grip on her arm seem almost gentle in comparison. He was led out of the cell and into the morning light, painfully bright after days of darkness. Through the ordered chaos of the Roman camp preparing for the march, past soldiers who stopped their work to stare, past other captives lined up for transport, past wagons loaded with the wealth of her conquered kingdom. She saw her crown on one of those wagons, the one she had worn while addressing her people, leading her armies when she believed courage and determination could hold back the most powerful military force the world had ever known. It was piled with other treasures, gold and silver from her palace, her temples, stripped from the bodies of nobles who had died defending their homes. She did not cry. She had already learned that tears were useless, only revealing weaknesses the Romans would exploit. But she memorized the wagon's position. She memorized the faces of the graying soldiers. She memorized everything, because information was the only weapon she had left, and she intended to use it. What you are about to learn has been systematically erased from the historical records that glorify the Roman triumph as a magnificent spectacle. The poets who described golden chariots and cheering crowds chose not to examine the camps, prisons, and ships where captured royalty spent the months before their public display. The historians who praised Roman military achievement preferred not to record the specific methods used to turn proud monarchs into broken captives suitable for parading. Tonight, you will learn what the triumph truly required. Not the single day of public celebration described in textbooks, but the months of preparation that came before. You will learn what Roman soldiers did to captured queens, kings, and princes during the long period between their capture and their display. You will learn why some captured royalty arrived in Rome already destroyed, while others were maintained in a state that preserved their appearance while shattering everything inside. You will learn about the officials in charge of royal prisoners, the specialists Rome called preparers who knew precisely how to break a monarch's will without destroying their body. You will learn the hierarchy of captives where some were destined for execution after the triumph and others were allowed to live, and what determined a prisoner's fate. You will learn the specific practices that historical sources describe only in euphemisms the hospitality officers provided for their most important captives. The entertainment captured royalty was required to provide on the journey to Rome. You will learn what happened to the women and children of conquered royal families. Why daughters were sometimes more valuable than sons, and what uses Rome found for royal offspring too young to pose a political threat. You will learn why Cleopatra chose suicide rather than allow herself to be taken to Rome. Why she understood that death was preferable to what awaited her in Octavian's triumph. You will learn the fate of the captured royalty who did not have Cleopatra's means of escape, who were forced to endure what she avoided through acid venom. If you want to understand the darkness behind Rome's most famous ritual, subscribe. Comment below where you're watching from, because Berenice is being led to the camp right now, toward a general who has a special plan for her, toward 8 months of preparation that will test everything she is. And I will tell you exactly what those plans were. But before revealing what the Romans did to Berenice and the other captured queens who walked in triumphs, I need to take you back. I need to show you how the triumph worked, why it required what it did, and why capturing royalty was valuable to Roman generals seeking glory. Because you cannot understand what happened to Berenice unless you understand the system that handled her. The Roman triumph was not just a parade. It was a religious ritual, a political statement, and a psychological weapon, all rolled into one overwhelming spectacle. A general celebrating the triumph was, for that day, almost a god, his face painted red like the statue of Jupiter, his person considered sacred, his achievements proclaimed to the entire Roman world. But triumphs were not easily granted. They required specific qualifications, enforced with increasing strictness by the Senate as Rome's power grew. The generals seeking a triumph had to hold the appropriate command, had to have killed at least 5,000 enemies in a single campaign, had to have expanded Roman territory or achieved a major strategic victory. And he needed captives, not just any captives. Ordinary prisoners of war could be sold as slaves, distributed as rewards to soldiers, disposed of in whatever way was convenient. That the triumph required special captives, visible proof of Rome's dominion over peoples who dared resist. The higher the captive status, the greater the glory reflected on the general who captured them. Capturing a general was valuable. Capturing a king was more valuable. To the captured queen walking in chains through Rome, her royal dignity reduced to a public spectacle, her body displayed as proof that Roman power, respected no range and acknowledged no limits. That was the ultimate prize. This created specific incentives regarding the treatment of captured royalty. They needed to survive until the triumph. They needed to be recognizable as royalty, their status visible to the crowds judging the general's achievements. They needed to be broken enough to walk in chains without resisting, without attempting escape or suicide, without doing anything that might disrupt the carefully choreographed display. But they also needed to be available to those who had captured them. The Roman officers who had risked their lives conquering distant kingdoms believed they were entitled to certain rewards. The general who would celebrate the triumph believed he had the right to experience his prizes before the public display. The soldiers who had fought and bled for Rome believed they deserved compensation for their sacrifice. These beliefs shaped everything that happened to royal captives between capture and triumph. The system for handling them was not arbitrary cruelty. It was organized methodical, refined over generations of Roman conquest. Specific officials were responsible for different aspects of prisoner management. Specific protocols determined who had access to which captives, when, and for what purpose. Specific hierarchies decided which captives were reserved for the general's personal use and which could be distributed to officers who had earned the privilege. The most valuable captives, the kings and queens who would be the centerpiece of the triumph, received special treatment. They were kept separate from ordinary prisoners. They were given sufficient food and kept in conditions that prevented disease and disfigurement. Their bodies were maintained in a state suitable for public display. Their minds were considered legitimate targets for whatever attention their captors wished to inflict. A queen who arrived in Rome too broken to walk was useless. A queen who arrived still defiant, still proud, still bearing the royal dignity of her reign, failed to prove Rome's dominion. The ideal captive was visibly royal in appearance, but visibly broken. His bearing showed she had been a monarch, but whose eyes showed she understood she was now property. Taming that balance required expertise, required time, required the 8 months between capture and triumph that Baroness was about to experience, and required people who knew how to break royalty without breaking their bodies. The general's tent was larger than the house Baroness had grown up in before becoming queen. Silk drapes covered the canvas walls, Persian carpets lay on the ground. Furniture that would not have been out of place in a Roman senator's villa surrounded a central space where incense would burn in a brazier despite the warm morning. Germanicus Julius Caesar sat behind a table covered in maps and dispatches, the morning light from the open tent flap illuminating a face Baroness had seen on coins and statues throughout the eastern Mediterranean. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 30-5, but the physique of an athlete honed by a lifetime of military service. His expression was intelligent, calculating, and utterly without mercy. "Queen of Cappadocia," he said. His voice was pleasant, cultured, the voice of a man raised in Rome's highest circles. "I have been looking forward to meeting you. Your resistance cost me 2 years and 11,000 soldiers. That is not something I forget." "I was defending my kingdom," Baroness replied. "You were invading it." "We both simply did what our positions required of us. Your kingdom no longer exists. Cappadocia is now a Roman province. The nobles are dead or enslaved. Your army is destroyed. Your treasury is packed into wagons bound for Rome. Everything you were, everything you represented, has been erased through the world." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Except for you. You kept me alive for the triumph. I kept you alive because you were the most valuable thing I captured in 7 years of warfare." A queen who resisted Rome for nearly a decade, killed a messenger's nephew, gave speeches comparing herself to Boudicca, and promised to drive the legions into the sea. "When you walk in chains broken in my triumph, every person in Rome will understand what I have achieved." And after the triumph, Germanicus smiled. It was the smile of an man discussing an interesting problem, not a life. "That depends on many factors. Your behavior over the next months, your value as a political symbol, your usefulness for other purposes." He gestured, and a servant appeared with wine. The general drank, offering none to Baroness. "You should understand certain things about your situation. You are no longer a queen. In Roman legal terms, you are not even a person. You are property of the Roman state, held in my custody until the triumph is completed. I understand. I don't think you do. Not yet. Germanicus set down his cup and examined her with an attention that made her skin prickle. A journey to Rome will take approximately 6 months. During that time, you will travel with my staff. You will be kept in conditions appropriate to your status as a valuable captive. You will be given adequate food, suitable clothing, maintained in a state fit for display. That sounds reasonable, hasn't it? But I haven't mentioned the other aspects of your captivity. At the role you will play during those 6 months beyond existing as Kygo. He stood from behind the table and approached her. The guard who had been holding her arm stepped back, leaving her standing alone before the most powerful man in the Eastern Roman Empire. You cost me 2 years, Germanicus said. You cost me 11,000 soldiers. You cost the life of a man from a family with influence in the Senate. These are debts, and I believe in repaying debts. And now what do you want from me? I want you to understand that your situation is entirely within my control. The survival until the triumph is not guaranteed, merely possible. Should you prove cooperative, there are ways this captivity could proceed, some more painful than others, and you will determine which path we take by your behavior. He was close now, close enough she could smell the wine on his breath and beneath it. Cinnamon, something Romans used to freshen their mouths. His hand came up to touch her face, a gentle gesture that carried absolute threat. Tonight you will dine with my officers, he said. You will dress appropriately, present yourself appropriately, and behave appropriately. This dinner will be your opportunity to demonstrate your understanding of your new status. Do you understand? Baroness understood. She understood perfectly what dinner with Roman officers meant for a captured queen with no protection and no recourse. I understand, she said. Good. Germanicus stepped back. The moment of intimacy was over. You will have a handler, a centurion named Marcus Cornelius. He will be responsible for your care and preparation. He will explain the details of what is expected of you. Obey him as you would obey me. A guard lead her from the tent. Behind her, she heard Germanicus already dictating letters, her presence forgotten as he turned to other business. She was property, a trophy, a prop for another man's glory. And tonight, she would learn what that meant in practice. Centurion Marcus Cornelius was not what Baroness expected. He was about 40, with the weathered face and scarred hands of a career soldier. But there was something in his eyes the other Romans she had encountered lacked. Not exactly kindness, but something more complicated. Perhaps recognition that the prisoner before him was a person, not just a category. He met her in a small tent designated as her quarters, containing a cot, a basin of water, and a chest of clothes she was not yet ready to examine. You are Baroness of Cappadocia, he said. I am Marcus Cornelius. I have been assigned to oversee your preparation. Preparation for what? Marcus looked at her for a long moment before answering. The official answer is preparation for the triumph. Ensuring you remain healthy, presentable, capable of walking the required distance through Rome. The unofficial answer is more complicated. Tell me the complicated one. The general and his officers believe they are entitled to access to you. They believe conquering your kingdom entitles them to your person as much as it does your treasury. During the journey to Rome, you will be expected to provide hospitality and various official functions. He said the word hospitality with precision, making it clear he was using the euphemism whose real meaning was understood by both parties. And if I refuse? There is a man named Gaius Varro. He is a tribune specializing in the management of important captives. His methods are effective at producing compliance. They are also destructive, sometimes permanently so. The general prefers to preserve your value for the triumph. That, if you prove uncooperative, Varro will be authorized to take over your preparation. What are his methods? Marcus was silent for a moment, and he spoke. His voice was careful, devoid of emotion. Varro believes royal captives need to be taught their new status through direct experience. He uses techniques designed to break resistance quickly. The captives he has prepared rarely survive long after the triumph. Those who do are never the same afterward. And you? Baroness asked. What are your methods? I prefer captives who survive. I prefer cooperation achieved through understanding, not destruction. Explain the situation honestly. Outline the available options. Let the captive make an informed choice. He looked directly into her eyes. You have no good choices. Everything for you is terrible. But some options are slightly less terrible than others. Choose wisely, and you may retain something of yourself through what is coming. This was an honesty from a Roman she hadn't expected. In a way, it was more dangerous. The captor who saw her as a person was someone she could potentially influence. The captor who acknowledged complexity was someone she could potentially manipulate. She filed this information away. Another small weapon in the arsenal she was building. What do you advise me to do? She asked. Cooperate at the dinner. Endure what the officers require. And not resist in ways that trigger Vara's intervention. Maintain your health, your sanity, and your will to survive until after the triumph. Afterward, other possibilities may exist. What possibilities? Some captured royalty have survived their triumphs. Some have been allowed to live in comfortable exile. Some have even been restored as client rulers, puppets ruling their former territories for Rome. These outcomes are rare, but they exist. If you can make yourself valuable to Rome in some way beyond the triumph, you may have a future. The word seemed almost absurd in her current situation, but Marcus said it as if it were real, as if planning for a future beyond captivity was not mere delusion. Why are you telling me this? Baroness asked. Why explain options to a prisoner you're supposed to be preparing for humiliation? Marcus didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice held something she hadn't heard before. So I have done this work for 15 years. I have prepared 17 royal captives for triumphs. 11 of them were dead within a year of walking through Rome, or killed themselves before the triumph happened, to survive to live something resembling a life. Which do you want to be? I want you to be the third one who survives. Not because I particularly like you, but because I am tired of watching people destroy themselves or be destroyed when other outcomes were possible. He turned toward the tent flap, then paused. The dinner tonight will be difficult. What comes after will be worse. But if you can endure it, if you can find a way through the next 8 months without completely breaking, you might walk away alive. That's some gift. To achieve that, it's worth enduring considerable horror. He left her alone with the clothes and the chest and the understanding of what the night would bring. Now I need to tell you something about the Roman triumph that standard history omits. The captives who walked in triumphs were not simply collected and transported. They were processed through a system designed to produce specific outcomes. This system had evolved over centuries of Roman territorial conquest, from Britain to Parthia, having millions of captives and refining its methods with each new conquest. The process had 3 main phases. Phase 1: capture and initial assessment. During this time, captives were sorted by value. Ordinary soldiers became slaves. Officers might be executed, ransomed, or held for the triumph, depending on their status. Royalty was always held; their value was too great to waste on immediate disposal. Phase 2: preparation. This lasted from capture until arrival in Rome, typically 3 to 12 months depending on travel distance. During preparation, royal captives were physically maintained while being psychologically broken down systematically. The goal was to produce prisoners who could walk, stand, respond appropriately to commands, while having lost all capacity for resistance or hope. Phase 3: display and disposition. The triumph itself lasted only a day, but its logistics required weeks of preparation in Rome. Captives were held in ancient dungeons beneath the Roman Forum, the Tully, and numerous temporary facilities built for the purpose. After the triumph, their fate was decided by political calculation: execution for those who remained threats, exile for those who might have uses, sometimes release into Roman society for those who had cooperated thoroughly enough. The preparation phase was where the real breaking happened. The Roman officers who had conquered territory believed they were entitled to rewards. The general received the triumph itself, the glory and political advancement it would bring. The legions received bonuses from captured treasuries. The officers, particularly the senior ones who had made strategic decisions, received something else. They received access. The euphemism used in Roman sources is hospitality hospitium, the same word Marcus used explaining Berenice's situation, that appears in military records as a category of expense, costs associated with providing appropriate hospitality to important captives during their preparation. Modern scholars often interpret this as referring to food and lodging, the practical necessities of maintaining a prisoner on a long journey. But other, less cited sources make clear what hospitality actually meant. Captured royalty, particularly captured queens and princesses, were expected to provide personal services to the officers who had conquered them. These services began with attendance at dinners, progressed through what sources call entertainment, and culminated in private audiences the records do not directly describe, but whose clear traces remain in pregnancy records and disease reports surviving in military archives. These services were not optional. Refusal triggered escalation to specialists, like the Gaius Varro Marcus described. These men used methods that produced compliance at the cost of the captive's long-term survival. Most captured royalty quickly learned that cooperation, however humiliating, was preferable to the alternative. But some resisted, and what happened to those who resisted reveals the true nature of Roman captivity management. In 146 BC, a Carthaginian princess who refused service was given to the common soldiers of the Third Legion. In 167 BC, a Macedonian queen who attempted escape was subjected to 3 days of public punishment. No media entrance who resisted during a service was castrated, then kept alive for the triumph as a monster displayed alongside his defeat. These examples were not secret. They were deliberately publicized as warnings to other captives about non-cooperation. They were part of the system, the stick alongside the carrot of survival. This is what Berenice faced as she dressed in the clothes the Romans had chosen to display her as a trophy for the dinner. As she prepared to provide hospitality to the officers who had destroyed her kingdom, she now understood what Marcus meant about options. She understood that every choice available to her was terrible. She understood that survival meant choosing the least terrible option and finding a way to endure the cost it demanded. The dinner was held in Germanicus's command tent, the same space where she had been informed of her status that morning, but the tent had been transformed. Maps and dispatches were gone, replaced by dining couches arranged around a central space where servants moved with skilled efficiency. Torches lit the interior with golden lights, softening faces, obscuring expressions. 12 officers reclined on the couches. Germanicus occupied the place of honor, his senior commanders arranged by rank. They wore civilian clothing rather than armor, a pretense that this was a civilized gathering rather than a military function. Berenice wore a gown that left little to the imagination, a translucent Greek mina-style garment the Romans associated with conquered Eastern peoples. Over her short hair was a wig in an elaborate style Roman women wore. The artificial of it was somehow more humiliating than simple baldness. Tall chains circled her wrists and ankles, decorative rather than functional, symbols of status rather than actual restraint. She was served up like a course, another dish of the evening's entertainment. The Queen of Cappadocia, Germanicus announced as she was brought into the space. A gift to you, in gratitude for your service in the Eastern campaigns. Gift. The word made the expectations clear. She was being given to these men, distributed among them like the other spoils of conquest. The officers examined her with the assessing gaze she had learned to recognize. Some looked with appreciation, some with cruelty. Plain. A thin man with calculating eyes, she would later learn was Gaius Varro, watched her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She is well preserved, an officer commented. The campaign was hard on the other royal captives. She is valuable, Germanicus replied. The triumph requires her to be in acceptable condition. But acceptable condition leaves considerable room for use. Laughter rippled through the gathering. Berenice stood motionless, her face carefully neutral, her mind racing through possibilities and finding no way out. Let her serve the wine, Varro suggested. Gay queen serving Roman officers, properly demonstrating her new status. Germanicus nodded. A servant thrust a wine jug into Baroness's hands and gestured toward the captive. She served. She moved among the officers, refiling cups, enduring the hands that found reasons to touch her as she leaned to pour. She kept her expression blank, her movements precise. Her consciousness was entirely focused on gathering information. Who held power? Who sought power? Who might be useful? Who was dangerous? Varro was dangerous. His eyes tracked her constantly, and when she came to refill his cup, his hand closed around her wrist with a pressure that promised pain. You are resisting, he said softly. For her ears alone. I can see it in your posture. You have not yet accepted your situation. You still believe you might escape, might somehow retain your dignity. I am cooperating, Baroness replied. I am serving as instructed. Your body is cooperating. Your mind is elsewhere. That is a problem I know how to solve. The general wishes you intact for the triumph. The general wishes you broken for the triumph. The question is merely one of method. I prefer my methods, but I am patient. Eventually, you will give me the opportunity I'm waiting for. He released her wrist. The imprint of his fingers would remain visible for days. The dinner continued. As the wine flowed, the officers' voices grew louder, and the entertainment changed. Then, as the night reached its inevitable conclusion, the officers began to make requests. The first officer who took Baroness to a private partition of the tent was not cruel, merely efficient. He finished quickly, returning her to the central space without comment. The second was slower, more interested in her reactions than her body, asking questions about her kingdom as he used her. The third left bruises that wouldn't show beneath her clothes. By the night's end, for officers had claimed their portion of victory. Baroness had experienced precisely what Marcus warned her about, and she had survived. He was returned to her tent, to the basin in the narrow cot, to the privacy where she could finally allow herself to feel the emotions she had suppressed for hours. She did not cry. She had promised herself she would not cry until she was free, until tears could be an expression of relief rather than defeat. She allowed herself to pray, and the next morning, Marcus arrived with breakfast and a physician. The physician examined her professionally, checking for injuries, applying salves to bruises, asking questions about pain and bleeding that Baroness answered with the same clinical detachment. She is intact, the physician reported to Marcus. Minor damage will not affect her display. Should be fit for service again in 2 days. Service, another euphemism. Baroness was learning the vocabulary of her captivity, the civilized language Romans used to describe savage things. After the physician left, Marcus sat on the chest containing her clothes and examined her with an expression she couldn't read. You survived, he said. Was there doubt? There is always doubt. Some women break at the first dinner. They resist. They fight. They trigger responses that leave them damaged beyond repair. It did not. I have no interest in being damaged beyond repair. I have an interest in survival. Cut. Survival requires strategy. Do you have a strategy? Baroness considered the question. Since the moment of her capture, she had been forming a strategy, but she hadn't voiced it. Voicing it would make it real, or commit her to a course of action that might be impossible. But Marcus had been honest with her, and he had explained her situation without deception. Perhaps honesty deserved honesty in return. Germanicus wants me broken for the triumph, she said, but he also wants me recognizable as a queen. To broken, and I'm useless. Not broken enough. And I failed to prove his victory accurate. My strategies appear broken on the surface, while remaining whole inside. Give him what the triumph requires, while retaining enough of myself to have a future after. Aris nodded slowly. A difficult balance. Many have attempted it. Most have failed. Why did those who fail? They couldn't maintain the deception. The horror accumulated faster than they could process it. They either broke genuinely or exposed their resistance and triggered escalation. Why did those who succeed? They found something to hold on to. Some reason for survival beyond mere survival. The purpose that sustained them through experiences that should have destroyed them. What kind of purpose? It varies. Some focused on revenge, though revenge from captivity is rarely possible. Some focused on children, though the children of captured queens oft unfare poorly. Some focused on preserving something knowledge, traditions, stories that would otherwise be lost. Varanus thought of her kingdom, now a Roman province, her nobles dead or enslaved, her treasury packed away. Her culture was already being erased by the Roman administrators who would rename her cities and replace her temples. My kingdom is gone, she said. My children are dead. My son died in the siege. My daughter was taken, I don't know where she is. I have no one to avenge, nothing but myself. Then you must find something else. Marcus stood from the chest. You have time. The journey to Rome takes 6 months. During that time, you will endure dinners like last night, perhaps once a week. Between dinners, you will travel. You will observe. You will think. Use that time to find your purpose. And if I don't find it, then you will break eventually. Not today, not tomorrow, and in some future month. The weight becomes too heavy when there's nothing to carry it. He left that warning with the remains of her breakfast. He ate mechanically, turning his question over in her mind. He needed a purpose. She needed something worth surviving for. He didn't have one yet. She had 6 months to find one. The westward journey began 3 days after the dinner. The army marched in disciplined columns, thousands of soldiers, hundreds of wagons, and a line of captives stretching nearly a mile. Baroness traveled in a covered wagon, which shielded her from sun and rain, while constantly reminding her she was cargo. The wagon was comfortable by military standards, cushioned seating, canvas walls providing privacy, supplies of water and food, but it was still a wheeled cruiser, rolling inexorably toward Rome. The wagon was not hers alone. 3 other captives shared the space, 2 women from Cappadocian noble families, and a girl of about 12 who had been a princess before the conquest. They had all survived their first dinners. They had all learned the survival vocabulary of captivity. The older women were already broken in important ways. They obeyed without resistance, served without complaint, spoke of the future as if it were a foreign country they would never visit. They had accepted their status, internalized it, become what Rome wanted them to be. The girl, named Ariadne, was different. She watched everything with eyes that missed nothing, remembered everything, constantly calculating. She reminded Baroness of herself at that age before she became queen, before she learned to hide intelligence behind proper feminine deference. You are planning something, Ariadne said one afternoon when the older women were sleeping and the wagon's rhythm was steady. Why do you think that? The way you look at everything, like you're memorizing it, the guards' schedules, the wagons, positions, which officers have jurisdiction over which prisoners. You're collecting information. Baroness considered denying it, but the girl was perceptive, and deception would only teach her not to trust, which could hurt her chances of survival. I am collecting information, Baroness admitted. I don't yet know what I'll do with it, but information is my only resource, so I collect it. Can I help? What would you do? I know how to listen. The soldiers talk around me like I'm furniture. They say things they wouldn't if they remembered I understand Latin. What kind of things? A centurion is stealing from the baggage train. Another is having an affair with the general secretary. A third has gambling debts he can't pay. Ariadne recited the information with precision. I don't know if any of it is useful, but I've been collecting it like you have. Baroness felt an unexpected warmth in her chest. His girl was smart, observant, potentially valuable. She was also young, vulnerable, likely to be broken by what awaited her in Rome. Perhaps this was the purpose Marcus had told her to find. Not survival for its own sake, but survival for the sake of others. Protecting this girl who reminded her of herself, who had the same intelligence and determination, who might have a future if someone helped her through the horrors to come. Keep collecting, Berenice said. Tell me what you learn. Perhaps together we can use it. Ariadne nodded, her expression serious beyond her years. What are we trying to achieve? I don't know yet, but I am beginning to believe we might achieve something. It wasn't much of a purpose. It was barely the beginning of a plan. But it was something to hold on to, something worth surviving for. For the first time since her capture, Berenice felt something that might be hope. The journey continued. The dinners continued. The systematic exploitation of captured royalty continued. Each event was another horror to endure, another night to survive, another step toward a future that might or might not exist. Berenice memorized the officers' names, their preferences, their weaknesses. She learned who had ambition, who was content, who resented Germanicus, who worshipped and who might be useful, who was simply dangerous. Gaius Varro remained the greatest danger. He watched her constantly, waiting for any sign of resistance that would justify transferring her custody to him. She gave him no excuse, performing required services without complaint, maintaining a facade of compliance that left him no opening. But she was not compliant. He was observing, planning, mapping the social terrain she would need to navigate. Marcus continued in his role as her handler. As the journey progressed, the conversations grew longer. He told her about his family in Italy, a wife and 2 sons he hadn't seen in 3 years. He told her about his career, 20 years of military service that had taught him everything about the Roman system and left him deeply conflicted about his participation in it. Why do you do this work? Berenice asked one night 3 months into the journey. If you have reservations, why continue? Because the work gets ended with. If not by me, then by someone like Varro, who would do it with enthusiasm rather than conflict. At least with me, some captives survive. At least with me, someone looks at them as people. That's not much comfort. It's not meant for comfort. It's meant for honesty. I can't change the system. I can only operate within it, reducing harm at the edges. Have you ever helped a captive escape? The question hung between them. Marcus was silent for a long time before answering. No escape from a triumph procession is virtually impossible. The captives are watched closely. The journey is too long, the destination too heavily guarded. Those who have tried work often subjected to punishments that made their previous treatment seem gentle. If it were possible, he said with an expression she couldn't read, I would have to weigh my loyalty to Rome against my humanity. I don't know which would win. Uranus filed that information away. Marcus was not an ally, not yet, but he was a potential ally. A man who might choose humanity over loyalty if the circumstances were right. Creating such circumstances became part of her plan. 5 months into the journey, they reached the Italian peninsula. The army paused at a major port city to resupply and reorganize for the final march to Rome. During this pause, Berenice received a visitor she had not expected. The woman came to her wagon, escorted by guards but with an air of authority that mocked her as no prisoner. She was about 50, bearing the bearing of a Roman aristocrat and the sharp eyes of someone who had survived decades of political maneuvering. I am Antonia Minor, the woman said, Germanicus's mother. I wish to see the Queen of Cappadocia before the triumph. Berenice had heard of Antonia, daughter of Mark Antony, niece of the divine Augustus, one of Rome's most powerful women despite holding no official position. Her visit was unexpected, potentially significant. Your visit honors me, Berenice said, using the formal courtesy royalty extended to equals. Treating Antonia as an equal was a gamble, but also a statement about how Berenice saw herself. Antonia smiled slightly, acknowledging the gamble. You speak with propriety, for someone in your situation. My son's reports suggested a barbarian queen. What I see is a woman who understands politics, who is educated. Cappadocia is not barbarian. He have libraries, theaters, temples. We are heirs to Greek and Persian civilization. Rome destroyed us not because we were inferior, but because we were in your way. A fair assessment. Antonia sat on the wagon's bench, ignoring the impropriety of a Roman noblewoman sitting with a captive. I wonder one thing. My son writes that you have been cooperative in your captivity, but his officers report you have not broken as expected. You comply, but you have not surrendered. That interests me. Am I supposed to surrender? Most do. The methods are effective. At this stage of the duel, most captured royalty are hollow shells, going through motions with no internal resistance. You are different. Why? Baroness considered the question. Antonia was either an opportunity or a danger, perhaps both, but she sensed honesty might serve better than deception. I am surviving for someone else, she said. There's a girl among the captives, 12 years old, intelligent, with a possible future if someone helps her. I am trying to be that someone. Antonia's expression changed, subtly. You have found a purpose. I was told I needed one. The one who told you was wise. Antonia stood from the bench. I will remember what you have said. After the triumph, there may be opportunities for captives who demonstrate value beyond their symbolic function. A woman who can educate and guide a child may have use as a broken slave does not. She left without further explanation, leaving Baroness to ponder what had just happened and what it might mean for her future. The final month of the journey was the hardest. As the procession neared Rome, the tension grew. The triumph was close, the culmination of years of planning and conquest, and every participant felt the pressure. Germanicus demanded more, his officers were more aggressive, the dinners more frequent and more humiliating. Baroness endured. She had endured worse in the first months, when she didn't know what to expect. Psychological strategies that allowed her to separate her consciousness from her body, to experience what was happening to her from a distance. She had Ariadne, who continued to gather information and share it during their whispered conversations. The girl had become like a daughter, a responsibility that gave Baroness's survival meaning beyond mere continuation. She had Marcus, whose conversations had become the closest thing to human connection she experienced. He had not become an ally in the active sense, offering to help her escape or resist, but he had become the person who saw her as human, who talked with her about things beyond captivity, who treated her as if she might have a future worth discussing. A week before the triumph, he told her something that changed everything. Germanicus has received instructions from Tiberius, Marcus said. The emperor has decided you will not be executed after the triumph. Not executed? Tiberius sees value in keeping you alive. Cappadocia has been restless under Roman rule. A former queen seen accepting Roman authority, living comfortably in Rome, serving as evidence that compliance is rewarded, might be useful for quelling continued resistance. I will be a symbol, a demonstration that cooperation is better than resistance. Yes, you will live in a comfortable residence, likely with a senatorial family supportive of the emperor. You will be expected to write to your former subjects, encouraging them to accept Roman rule. Essentially, you will be a propaganda tool. Baroness digested this information. Survival was possible. More than possible, it was planned. But the cost was becoming a too love Roman imperialism, helping to destroy what remained of her kingdom's resistance. And if I refuse, then you have no value alive. The execution after the triumph becomes the default. Ariadne, the other captives, the girl might be sold as slaves or sent to a household as servants. The other women likely faced the same fate. Their fates are not worth the empire's attention. Berenice understood the choice before her. Cooperate and live, refuse and die. Save herself by abandoning those she cared about. What if I can offer something more valuable than propaganda, she asked. Lucas looked at her sharply. What do you mean? I know things about Cappadocia the Roman administrators don't. Locations of hidden treasures not discovered during the conquest. Names of underground resistance leaders. The internal politics of families pretending compliance while planning rebellion. I could provide intelligence that would make the province easier to govern. That would make you a traitor to your own people. I'm already a traitor. I survived by providing services to the officers who conquered me. The question is not whether I betray my people, but what I get in return for that betrayal. What do you want? I want Ariadne. I want the right to keep her with me, to educate her, to prepare her for a future not involving slavery. I want the other women from my wagon sent to household, where they will be treated appropriately, not sold to the highest bidder. I want a small measure of autonomy over my own existence. Marcus was silent for a long time. I cannot promise any of that. I can only bring your offer to those who have the power. Then bring it. Tell them the Queen of Cappadocia is willing to become an asset to Rome. But she has conditions. See what they say. He left to inquire. Erinus sat alone in the wagon, wondering if she had just guaranteed her survival or signed her death warrant. The triumph began at dawn on the 3rd of September. Erinus was prepared by experts who knew how to properly display a captured queen. Aha, grown back several inches during the journey, was styled in the elaborate fashion of her Olwa kingdom, specifically preserved from the lint for this purpose. War. Clothes were the royal regalia of Cappadocia. Old chains hung from her neck and wrists, heavier than the decorative restraints she had worn on the journey, symbols of captivity net to be seen by the crowds. She marched between wagons of spoils and blocks of soldiers, a living trophy among inanimate ones. All around her, Rome's streets were lined with citizens come to celebrate Germanicus's victory, cheering the soldiers, jeering the captives, participating in the spectacle that made Roman imperialism visible and tangible. The procession route was long. It wound from the Campus Martius through the city to the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, hours of walking at the procession's formal pace. Erinus's feet ache, her body protested, but she kept walking. She held her head high. It wasn't exactly defiance. She had been instructed to walk with dignity, to be recognizable as a queen, so her defeat would have meaning. In fact, she chose to interpret the instruction broadly, projecting royal bearing rather than the broken state the Romans expected. The crowd noticed. She heard comments as she passed, surprised that the Queen of Cappadocia looked like a monarch rather than a victim. Some jeered louder, trying to provoke a reaction. Others fell silent, recognizing in her being something that didn't fit their expected narrative. Near the forum, she saw Antonia, a miner, watching from a balcony. Their eyes met briefly. Antonia gave a slight nod, a tiny gesture of acknowledgement no one else would notice. Before the Temple of Jupiter, the procession halted. This was where captives' fates were decided, where tradition dictated kings and queens were executed as sacrifices to the god who had given Rome victory. Uranus waited. Germanicus ascended the temple steps, his face painted red, like Jupiter's statue, his toga purple and gold, like an emperor's. He made sacrifices, accepted the crowd's cheers, give us each about Roman glory and the defeat of Rome's enemies. Then he turned to the captives. The Queen of Cappadocia has demonstrated her acceptance of Roman authority, he announced. He has offered to serve Roman interests in her forward territories. The emperor, in his wisdom and mercy, has ordered that she shall live. The crowd murmured, surprised at mercy where execution usually concluded the ritual. She will be housed in the residence of my mother, Antonia Minor, where she will serve as proof that Rome rewards compliance as surely as it punishes resistance. Her cooperation in the administration of Cappadocia will be an example to all who consider defying Roman power. And that was it. She would live. Soldiers lead her away from the temple, away from the crowds, away from the spectacle. Behind her, other captives were less fortunate. The tears she heard indicated executions were proceeding as planned for those who hadn't found ways to make themselves valuable. But she lived, and somewhere in the crowd, Ariadne was watching, waiting to learn if Berenice's promise could be kept. Antonia Minor's residence was not what Berenice expected. It was undeniably comfortable. Eid Illa on the Palatine Hill, staffed by slaves and freedmen who treated her with the respect due a guest rather than a conquered enemy. She had her own rooms, her own servants, a small measure of autonomy within the larger structure of her captivity. But it was also a center of political operation. Antonia used Berenice's knowledge of Cappadocia to influence Roman policy in the province. The intelligence provided about hidden treasures and resistance networks was acted upon. Roman soldiers went to the locations she indicated, confiscating assets, arresting leaders. Her betrayal was systematic, thorough, undeniable, and she told herself she had no choice. She told herself she was trading a lesser evil for a greater good. She told herself those she betrayed would have been discovered eventually. Her intelligence merely accelerated an inevitable process. She didn't entirely believe herself, but she kept reacting. The girl lived in her quarters, educated by tutors Baroness selected, prepared for a future not involving slavery. Antonia kept that promise, recognizing that Baroness's cooperation was more reliable when she had something to protect. The other women from the wagon fared adequately. They were placed in households where Antonia had influence, treated as servants rather than slaves, given difficult but not humiliating work. It wasn't freedom, but it was survival. Marcus Cornelius visited occasionally. His military service had ended after the triumph, and he had returned to his family in Italy, but he found reasons to come to Rome, to check on the captive he had guided through months of horror. "You survived," he said during one such visit, echoing what he had said after her first dinner with the officers. "I survived." "Is it enough?" "It depends what you do with survival. Some survivors become hollow, living without purpose after the crisis passes. Others find new purposes, new reasons to continue. Which are you?" Uranus looked at Ariadne, studying Greek in a corner of the room, focused and serious, making remarkable progress. "I am trying to be the second kind," she said. "I am trying to find purposes that justify what I did to survive." "Have you found them?" "I'm raising a girl who will grow into an educated, capable woman, free in ways I will never be. I am preserving knowledge about my kingdom that would otherwise be lost, writing histories the Romans will ignore but future generations might discover. I live, and while I live, I can do things the dead cannot." Arcus nodded slowly. "That is more than most survivors achieve. It is not enough. It never is, but it is what is possible, and I have learned to work with what is possible, rather than mourn what is not." He stayed for dinner that evening, the first time she had dined with a Roman man without the expectation of service afterward. They talked philosophy, history, the futures they might have had in another world. It was almost like friendship, almost like the human connection captivity had denied her. After he left, Baroness returned to her writing, preserving another fragment of Cappadocian history before it was forgotten entirely. Years passed. Ariadne grew into a young woman of remarkable intelligence and determination. At 16, she was freed by Antonia, who recognized an educated freed woman was more valuable than an enslaved girl. At 18, she married a Greek merchant who treated her as an equal, valuing her mind as much as her beauty. At 20, she had children of her own, children who would grow up free, never knowing what their grandmother had endured for their existence. Baroness watched this with a satisfaction that didn't entirely dispel her sadness. He had saved a girl, he had betrayed a kingdom. The accounting of survival did not balance easily. In AD 37, Antonia died, and Baroness's status became uncertain. She was not a slave. Antonia had freed her years before in reward for her continued cooperation. But she was not truly free either. She was a former queen living in Rome, dependent on the patronage of men who valued her historical knowledge and diplomatic connections, living on the empire's suffrages. She wrote letters to Ariadne's children, teaching them what she remembered of Cappadocian history and culture. She corresponded with scholars interested in the eastern provinces, providing information that later appeared in the works of historians, whose names would endure while her own was forgotten. He lived quietly, unnoticed, a remnant of a world Rome had destroyed. Marcus visited when he could, retired from the legions after 30 years of service. Settled on a farm in Campania, he had become the peaceful old man his younger self would have despised. That he remembered the Queen of Cappadocia, who had survived when survival seemed impossible, and he made time to see her. "You regret it?" he asked during one of their last conversations, when both were old and death was no longer a distant abstraction. "Regret what?" "Survival. The choices you made to survive." The betrayals, the cooperation, the transformation from queen to informant to symbol of compliance. Baroness considered the question. She had asked it of herself many times over the decades, never arriving at a satisfactory answer. "I regret that I had to make those choices," she said finally. "I regret that the world was arranged such that survival required betrayal, that protecting one person meant abandoning others. But do I regret choosing survival over death? Life over principle? No, I do not. Even knowing its cost, even knowing that because Ariadne lies, her children live, something of Cappadocia survives in the stories I preserved and the traditions I passed on. If I had died at the triumph, if I had chosen principle over survival, none of that would exist. The dead do not write histories, raise children, or preserve what would otherwise be lost." Marcus nodded slowly. "Think you made the right choice. For whatever my judgment is worth, your judgment is worth more than you know. You saw me as a person when others saw only a trophy. You helped me find purpose when I had lost everything. I survived in part because you showed me survival was possible." They sat in silence for a while. To old people who had witnessed the imperial machinery from different positions, who had found ways to remain human after their participation in it. "Will you be remembered?" Marcus asked. "Not by name. History will mention the Queen of Cappadocia who walked in Germanicus's triumph, but it will not record what happened to her afterward. I will disappear from the record, as I disappeared from public life." That seems unjust. Justice has nothing to do with history. History remembers the powerful and forgets their victims. That somewhere in the manuscript copies of our writings, in the memories of Ariadne's descendants, in the fragments that survive when the empire falls, something of me will remain. Something of Cappadocia will remain. That is all I hoped for. It is enough. He died 2 years later, in her sleep, in the villa Ariadne had purchased for her with money earned through trade. There Ariadne buried her according to Cappadocian customs, using rituals and nearly forgotten traditions the Romans would not recognize. The tombstone did not identify her as a queen. It read only, "Baroness." She survived. What you have learned tonight is not the story Roman historians tell. They glorified the triumph as Rome's magnificent expression of power, recording the spoils, the captives, the general's face painted red. They mentioned the Queen of Cappadocia in passing, noted she was spared rather than executed, and moved on to other subjects. They did not describe the dinners, the hospitality, the months of systematic exploitation before the public spectacle. They did not record the choices facing captured royalty, the bargains they struck, the pieces of themselves they sacrificed to survive. But the evidence exists for those who look for it. Military expense reports containing questionable categories, medical records noting injuries and pregnancies, private letters describing entertainment in terms so vague they sound innocent. Phrases of what happened to captured queens before they walked in triumph survive, and archive scholars have traditionally chosen not to examine closely. The Romans were not unique in their treatment of captured royalty. Every conquering power in history has faced the problem of what to do with defeated monarchs, and most have answered with systematic discussion in various forms. What made Rome distinctive was the institutionalization of that destruction, the development of protocols, procedures, and specialists, turning individual cruelty into bureaucratic process. Baroness survived that process because she understood it, analyzed it, found ways to operate within it. She was not passive. She was not merely lucky. She was intelligent, observant, and willing to make choices others might consider unforgivable to continue existing. Some will call her cooperation treason. Some will call her survival cowardice. Some will say a dignified death was preferable to compromised survival. But she survived. She raised a girl who grew into a woman. She preserved knowledge that would otherwise have been lost. She found purposes that made survival meaningful rather than mere biological existence. And she left a record, fragments preserved in archives, traditions passed through generations, that allow us to know the triumph was not the whole story. What came before the triumph was worse than what happened during it. The queens who walked in chains through Rome and already endured horrors the cheering crowds never saw and heroic histories never mentioned. Remember, Baroness, Remember the Queen of Cappadocia who survived when survival seemed impossible. Remember her walking through Rome with her head high, not because she was unbroken, but because she had rebuilt herself from broken pieces. Remember that survival is not victory, but neither is it defeat. It is something else, more complicated, requiring choices. Those who have never faced them cannot easily judge. Remember the other women who did not survive, whose names are lost, whose stories ended in Roman dungeons, on Jupiter's altars, or in the slow destruction of the westward journey. They deserved better. They all deserved better. Remember the Roman Rhians celebrated for centuries as the pinnacle of military glory was built on the systematic destruction of human beings whose only crime was living in territories Rome wanted to control. The golden chariots, the cheering crowds, the triumphant general, all built on a foundation of pain official history chose to forget. Remember that choosing survival is not weakness, that compromising to survive is not cowardice. Those who endure horrific circumstances and find ways to remain human deserve recognition, not judgment. Remember Berenice writing her histories in a Roman villa, raising a girl who would have children of her own, preserving what could be preserved of a world Rome destroyed. She survived. And sometimes survival itself is a kind of victory.